I enrolled in college. That's what I said. Just that. Over breakfast, while the coffee was still warm and the toast still crackled on the plate. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did, ever so slightly. I knew what was coming. My 3 children looked at me as if I had just told them I was going skydiving in a nightgown. College? My oldest Mariana said with a short laugh. Mom, you're 70. She said 70 like it was a death sentence, like it meant something was over, like it disqualified me from wanting anything more from life. Exactly, I replied softly. I'm 70. I'm still alive. Rodrigo, the middle one, crossed his arms. You're bored. That's what this is. You need a hobby, not humiliation. You're going to embarrass yourself. Embarrass myself? It cut deeper than they could ever know. These were the children I gave everything for, the ones I stayed up sewing school uniforms for, the ones I fed before I fed myself. And now, the idea of me pursuing something for myself, a joke to them. I held my coffee cup tightly, not because it was hot, but because it grounded me. Like if I let go, I'd fall into a silence I'd never climb out of. I've been a seamstress all my life. Started when I was 12, threading needles for my mother. Never made it past the 9th grade. When I got married, my husband told me education wasn't a woman's priority. A good wife cooks, sews, and keeps quiet, he'd say. I stayed quiet for decades. I raised a family, buried a husband, and worked my hands raw just to keep the lights on. The idea of going back to school felt like some distant, absurd dream, like dancing again, or singing, or being called by my first name instead of mom. Then one night, alone at the kitchen table, I saw a TV segment about a public university offering programs for seniors. I stared at the screen as if it were speaking directly to me. My fingers trembled, not with fear, with recognition. This, this was for me. The next morning, I packed my old ID, a folder of documents, and walked, yes, walked, to the bus stop. My legs ached, but my heart beat like it hadn't in years. At the admissions desk, the young woman looked surprised when I said I wanted to apply, but she smiled, genuinely. That's amazing, she said. We'd love to have you. It was the first time in years that someone used you and amazing in the same sentence about me. But when I told my children, laughter, sarcasm, incredulity. What will you do with a diploma? Rodrigo mocked. Start a career at 80? I wanted to scream. I gave you everything. Can I have this one thing for myself? But I didn't scream. I never have. Dignity, I've learned, is the ability to stay silent when your heart is breaking. I'll be studying philosophy, I said. That did it. Mariana shook her head in disbelief. You just want attention. That was the worst of it. The way they dismissed me, not just as incapable, but as pathetic. Like I had no right to want anything anymore. Like I was just furniture in their lives, dependable, unchanging, and expected to stay in the same corner. That night, I sat on my bed, holding a blank notebook I'd bought months ago. Its pages were white and full of possibility. I wrote on the cover, Philosophy, Semester 1. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I went to my dresser and took out a photo of my mother. She never learned to read, died not knowing how to write her own name. I'll study for both of us, I whispered. The next morning, I dressed with intention, tied my gray hair into a neat bun, buttoned my best blouse, and tucked that notebook under my arm like it was a precious artifact. On the walk to the bus stop, I heard a neighbor mutter, "Why's Lourdes all dressed up? Is she going to a funeral?" And in a way, yes. That morning, I buried the version of myself who waited for permission to live. I wasn't going to college to be young again. I was going to remind myself that I was still here, still learning, still worthy, still alive. Wonderful. Now, let's continue with, it's strange, the things you learn to live without when no one asks what you want. For 70 years, I walked through life as someone else's backbone. I was the wife, the mother, the neighbor who could be counted on. The woman who never said no, but never, never, was I asked, Lords, what do you dream of? I don't even remember the last time someone said my name the way it was meant to be said. Not shouted across the yard, not called from the kitchen, just spoken softly as if it meant something. That silence, the one that follows a lifetime of being needed but never seen, that's the hardest to carry. I was 15 the first time I dreamed of being a teacher. I'd sit at the kitchen table late at night after my chores, pretending the broomstick was a chalkboard. I'd teach imaginary students about words I barely understood myself. But we were poor. I was the eldest of 5. And when my father died, I had to drop out of school and sew full-time to help my mother. The day I packed my books away, she looked at me and said, God will bless you for this sacrifice. Maybe he did. But I never stopped wondering what might have been if I'd had even 1 year more. When I married at 19, my husband was a stern, quiet man. Not cruel, not at first, but firm, traditional. The kind of man who believed that ambition in a woman was a sign of unrest, even rebellion. I didn't marry a philosopher, he told me once, when I mentioned I liked to read poetry. He didn't hit me. That's what people say when they want to excuse emotional poverty. He never laid a hand on you. As if neglect doesn't leave bruises too. He gave me 3 children, and then he gave his life to the factory. When he got sick, I became everything: nurse, cook, maid, mother, and widow in waiting. He passed when I was 52, and I didn't cry. I cooked. I paid the bills. I arranged the funeral. I held my children's hands while they wept. But inside me, nothing moved. I had forgotten how. Time, when you're older, becomes a gentle thief. It doesn't rob you violently. It just quietly removes pieces of you. Little joys, sharp memories, the sound of your own laugh. I spent nearly 2 decades after his death just surviving. I ironed my son's shirts long after he moved out. I made Sunday lunch even when no one came. I told myself I was needed, even when the phone stayed silent for weeks. Then one evening, I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, alone, as usual, and I dropped a plate. It shattered across the tiles. I stared at the pieces on the floor, my hands trembling, and I thought, if I died right now, would anyone know who I really was? Not what I did for others, but who I was. I couldn't answer. That terrified me. I started reading again that night. I found an old book in the back of the wardrobe, buried beneath sweaters and forgotten receipts. It was Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. I didn't remember buying it. Maybe it had belonged to one of the children. But the words, they reached me like a warm hand through ice. Go into yourself, it said. Examine the reason that bids you write. Find out whether it is spreading out its roots in the deepest places of your heart. I wasn't a writer, but I knew what it meant to feel something take root again. That's when I started thinking about college, not because I wanted a degree, because I wanted a voice. I began collecting small notebooks. I'd write quotes, thoughts, things I remembered from my childhood. It felt silly at first, like playing pretend again. But then the words started flowing more easily. It wasn't long after that I saw the TV segment about the university program for seniors. It was only 30 seconds, a small blip in the evening news. But to me, it was like someone had cracked open a window in a room long sealed shut. When I enrolled, I didn't tell anyone right away. I wanted it to be mine for a little longer. I'd already lost 70 years to other people's needs. This dream, this whisper of purpose, it was going to have my name on it, Lords. Funny how people always assume the elderly are done dreaming. They think we've retired from hope, that we sit on porches watching birds because we've forgotten how to fly. But I remember now. I remember that 15-year-old girl with calloused hands pretending to teach invisible students. She's still here, just quieter, just waiting. And now, she's finally going to speak. Perfect. Let's move forward with, they didn't even look up from their phones. I had invited all three of them, Mariana, Rodrigo, and Lucas, for dinner. I cooked their childhood favorites, beef stew, garlic rice, fried plantains, and flan for dessert. I ironed the tablecloth, polished the silverware, put on the pearl earrings their father gave me in 1981. I wanted this to be special. I wanted to tell them gently, but they barely noticed. Mariana scrolled while nibbling on a piece of bread. Rodrigo stared blankly at a sports app. Lucas, the youngest, seemed the most distracted of all, murmuring something about a work email. I wanted to share some news, I said, trying to inject a bit of lightness in my tone. Are you okay? Mariana asked without looking up. You're not sick, are you? No, I said, smiling faintly. I've been accepted into college. That got their attention. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me like a spotlight. Suspicious, confused, half amused. What kind of college? Rodrigo asked. A university, I said. I'll be starting a philosophy degree next month. Mariana's mouth fell open slightly, like she was trying to process a foreign language. Wait, Lucas said, blinking. Like, actual college? I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. Yes, real college. That's when the laughter started. Quiet at first, then louder. Rodrigo leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. Are you serious, Mom? You're 70. So? I asked softly. So, why? What for? What are you going to do with a philosophy degree at your age? I don't want it to do anything, I said. I just want to learn. They stared like I had said I was running off to join the circus. Mariana's voice dropped. You'll embarrass yourself. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, feeling the heat crawl up my neck. The room suddenly felt smaller. The smell of garlic and stew clung to the air, thick and heavy. You don't know how universities are today, she continued. They're fast, tech-heavy. The classes are online. You'll get confused, frustrated. I'm not afraid of being confused, I said. I'm afraid of never trying. Rodrigo exhaled like I'd exhausted him. This is some kind of phase, right? Some retirement crisis thing? Lucas spoke up then, quieter. You know, Mom, it's admirable, but it's just not practical. Why put yourself through all that at this stage? At this stage. I looked at my hands. Wrinkled, veined, beautiful. These hands had pulled 3 children from sickness, from fear, from hunger. These hands had stitched torn uniforms at midnight. These hands had buried their father and made it to every graduation ceremony. And now, those same children couldn't imagine me worthy of a lecture hall. After they left that night, I stood in the kitchen long after the dishes were clean. The chairs were empty again. The clock ticked quietly. The flan remained untouched. I sat down and poured myself a glass of wine, not to celebrate, but to grieve. I had spent a lifetime giving. I gave when it was easy. I gave when it was hard. I gave until I forgot what it felt like to want something for myself. And now, the one time I reached out towards something that was mine, they laughed. I wasn't angry. I was hollow. The next morning, I didn't get out of bed, not right away. I just lay there watching the light move across the ceiling. I thought about canceling my enrollment, about returning the books, about letting this little flame die quietly. But then I remembered something Mariana said when she was 16. She had failed a math exam and came home in tears. She told me, I'm stupid. I'll never get it. I had knelt beside her and said, You're not stupid. You're just learning something hard, and when it's hard, it means you're growing. I'd said that to her, so why couldn't I say it to myself? I sat up, pulled the covers aside, and stood up with purpose. I wasn't going to shrink to fit inside their vision of me. Not anymore. Later that day, I found an old scarf in my closet, soft blue silk with little golden birds. It had belonged to my mother. She never had the chance to go to school, never learned to read. I tied it around my neck like armor, and then I did something I never thought I'd do. I opened the laptop Mariana had given me years ago and started watching online lectures. I paused when confused, replayed when overwhelmed, took notes like a schoolgirl. And do you know what I felt? Not fear, not foolishness, joy, a quiet, unshakable joy. They don't know yet what I'm capable of. They don't have to. I'm not doing this to prove them wrong. I'm doing it to prove myself right. Because there's something more dangerous than embarrassment. It's regret. And I've had enough of that for one lifetime. I stood outside the campus gates with my notebook clutched to my chest like a shield. The building was beautiful, modern, glass and concrete stretching toward the sky, but I couldn't help feeling like I didn't belong there. Students streamed past me in every direction, earbuds in, backpacks slung over one shoulder, eyes fixed on screens. Not one of them looked like me. I wore a beige cardigan and low-heeled shoes. My gray hair was pulled neatly into a bun. I had applied a light touch of lipstick that morning, soft rose like I used to wear when I was a girl, but I felt exposed, like an imposter. This is what you wanted, I reminded myself. This is your dream. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and walked through the front door. The classroom was on the third floor. I took the stairs, slowly, trying to ignore the students rushing past me two at a time. My knees ached, my heart pounded, not from the climb, but from fear. I arrived 5 minutes early and chose a seat in the back corner near the window. I placed my notebook carefully on the desk, hands folded, spine straight, just like the first day of school, 55 years ago. Students filed in, young, loud, effortlessly alive. No one looked my way. A few glanced, then turned quickly back to their phones. One girl whispered something to a friend while looking at me. They giggled. I tried to smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. The professor walked in with a burst of energy. Mid-40s, thick glasses, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He greeted the class with a warm, booming voice. "Welcome to Introduction to Philosophy," he said. "This is where we begin asking questions that may never be answered." I liked that. He began writing on the board. Plato, Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. And I started taking notes. My hand trembled slightly, but I focused. I could do this. I was doing this. Then came the discussion. The professor asked, "What does it mean to live a good life?" A dozen hands shot up. I hesitated, then slowly raised mine too. He didn't see me, or maybe chose not to. He called on a boy in a hoodie, then a girl with green hair and a confident voice. I lowered my hand. I wasn't angry. I understood how it worked. You see the eager faces, the loud ones, the ones who belong. I must have looked like someone's grandmother who wandered into the wrong room. Midway through class, the professor posed a question about ethics and decision-making. The room buzzed with debate. I saw an opening. Carefully, I raised my hand again. This time, he called on me. "Yes, in the back." I cleared my throat. I believe ethics isn't just about decisions in the abstract. It's about how we treat each other in the ordinary, invisible moments. The room went quiet. He nodded, a little surprised. "Interesting." Before I could continue, a voice near the front mumbled just loud enough for others to hear. "Damn, that's deep. Grandma's woke." Laughter broke out, not loud, but sharp, quick, enough to slice through the little confidence I'd built. The professor didn't say anything, just moved on. I sat there, still as stone, heart thudding in my ears. Grandma's woke. After class, I stayed behind, pretending to organize my notes while the room emptied. My eyes burned, but I refused to let the tears fall there. Not where they could see. When I finally stepped into the hallway, the building felt colder than before. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing too loudly against the tile. I passed a group of students laughing near the vending machines. One looked my way, then looked quickly away. I wasn't invisible. I was out of place. I thought about going home, about calling the university and withdrawing. I could make up a reason. Say my health wasn't good. Say it was too far, too late. No one would blame me. Everyone would understand. But then I remembered my mother, how she used to trace the letters in her Bible, pretending she knew what they meant, how she smiled proudly every time I brought a book home, even though she couldn't read the title. She never set foot in a classroom, but now I could, for both of us. I stepped outside and tilted my face toward the sun. It was warm and steady, like an old friend. I closed my eyes and let it touch my skin. I was humiliated, but not defeated. That night, I didn't tell my children about the laughter. I didn't mention the stares. I just told them class went well, because it did. I had raised my hand, I had spoken, I had shown up, and I would do it again, tomorrow and the day after, because the dream is still alive, even if I'm the only one who sees it. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes when you're surrounded by people who don't see you. Not because they're cruel, but because to them, you've already lived your life. At school, I moved through the hallways like a ghost. No one was unkind, not really, but they didn't look at me either, not in the eyes, not for more than a second. Sometimes I wondered if I had truly become invisible. I'd sit on the benches outside before class, watching groups of students laugh and talk with that reckless energy only youth carries. Their sneakers were loud, their voices louder, and their lives seemed like they were always beginning. Mine, they must have assumed, was wrapping up. But I didn't feel finished. I felt unfinished, like I had pages left to write. I just didn't know if anyone would bother to read them. In the cafeteria, I sat alone, always. I brought my lunch in a little Tupperware container, brown rice, grilled chicken, and vegetables I'd chopped carefully that morning. I didn't eat fast food, didn't drink sodas. I'd lived long enough to learn the cost of poor choices. Around me, students tapped away at their phones, swiped through photos, laughed over memes I didn't understand. Once I smiled at a girl sitting at the next table. She looked up briefly, blinked, then looked away. It wasn't cruel, just dismissive, like I wasn't part of her world, like I was a passerby in a scene that didn't concern me. And yet, I kept showing up. I kept attending every class, arriving early, sitting in the same corner seat near the window. I kept reading late into the night. I kept raising my hand, even when it wasn't called, not because I thought I'd be noticed, but because I refused to disappear. One afternoon, I stayed late to finish an assignment in the library. The philosophy wing was nearly empty, sunlight stretching across the floor in tired lines. I found a copy of The Republic, an old edition, its spine cracked, pages yellowing. It smelled like time itself, like dust and ink and memory. I sat in a quiet corner and opened to a random page. Those who tell the stories rule society. I whispered the words out loud, then read them again. Was that what I was doing? Telling my story? Or simply trying to remember that I had one? That same week, during a group exercise in class, we were told to partner up, a simple enough request. But no one turned toward me. The professor hadn't even finished his sentence before the room erupted into motion. Friends turning to friends, desks sliding together, whispered jokes flying across the room like paper planes. And me? I just sat there staring at my notebook, pretending to reread the instructions. After a while, the professor noticed and asked a pair to include me. They did, with a tight smile and distracted eyes. They were polite, but I was decoration. I spoke only when asked, and when I did, they nodded vaguely, as if they were trying to process an echo from far away. When class ended, one of the boys gave me a thumbs up. "You're doing great, Mrs. Lords," I said. He blinked. "Oh, right, Lords." I smiled anyway. That night, I cried in the shower, not because I was bullied, not because they were cruel, but because I had become a stranger in a world I had longed for. No one tells you that achieving a dream can still feel like a form of grief. Grief for all the years I didn't do this. Grief for how far behind I was. Grief for realizing that the world doesn't pause to make room for late bloomers. But I stayed. I kept going. Because dreams are not reserved for the young, and because I was tired of silencing myself. One morning, as I was leaving campus, I passed a boy sitting alone on the grass. He was hunched over, rubbing his temples, a laptop open beside him. Something about his posture felt familiar, defeated, heavy. I slowed down, then stopped. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. He looked up, startled. His eyes were red. "I failed an assignment," he muttered. "My third one." I nodded. "I failed at things too," I said. "A lot of them. Doesn't mean you stop trying." He gave me a strange look, like he wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or grateful. Then quietly he said, "Thanks." I walked on, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a person again, even if just for a moment. Excellent. Let's continue with, I didn't plan to break down in a public bathroom stall, but that's where it happened. Third floor, right outside Lecture Hall B. Kind of stall with thin gray doors and a flickering light that made everything feel colder than it was. I had just come from class. Another lecture where I had sat in silence, notebook open, heart racing every time the professor asked a question, and I didn't dare raise my hand. Not after last time, not after Grandma's woke. Not after the way the girls had whispered and laughed when I mispronounced epistemology. I had been holding it together, smiling when I didn't feel like it, nodding along, pretending that being ignored was fine, that I was above it. But that morning, it cracked. All it took was one moment. We had a surprise quiz. 5 short questions. I panicked. My mind went blank, not because I didn't study. I had. For hours. I had reread the material until my eyes stung. But when the paper landed on my desk, my hands started to sweat. My chest tightened. The words blurred. I couldn't focus. I finished it. Slowly. Desperately. The letters on the page looked like a child's scrawl. When I handed it in, the girl behind me snickered under her breath. I heard her say, "Poor thing, she's trying," as if I were a puppy struggling to walk in a pair of shoes. I rushed out of class, walked straight past the rows of benches, and ducked into the nearest bathroom. I didn't look at anyone. I couldn't. My eyes were already burning. Once inside, I locked the stall, sat down, and pulled my notebook from my bag. It was my lifeline. Lined pages filled with underlined concepts, careful handwriting, and dozens of sticky notes with reminders and questions. I looked at it, then at my hands, trembling with shame. And before I could stop myself, I pulled at the pages. Hard, the first sheet tore with a sharp rip, then another. I wanted to destroy it, to tear up every word I'd written, to erase the proof that I had believed, foolishly, that I could do this. I gripped the notebook tighter, my vision blurred. A sob rose in my throat, thick and painful. What was I doing here? Who did I think I was? A 70-year-old widow, playing college student, as if I could turn back time. I pressed my hand to my chest. I felt like I was falling. That's when I heard it. A sound, soft, rhythmic, crying, but not mine. Someone else in the next stall. We were 2 women, separated by a flimsy wall, breaking quietly in the same space. I froze. She didn't know I was there. I listened, not to pry, but because the sound made me feel not alone. Whoever she was young. Her voice cracked like glass under pressure. "I can't do this," she whispered to herself. "I'm so stupid." My breath caught, because that voice, it could have been mine. I wanted to speak. I don't know why. Maybe because I couldn't bear the silence between us. Maybe because I needed to hear the words just as much as she did. So I did. Quietly. "You're not stupid," I said. "You're just overwhelmed." The crying stopped. Silence. Then, "What?" "I've been sitting here thinking the same thing," I said. "That maybe I don't belong here. That I'm too old. Too slow." She didn't respond right away. Then she let out a short, shaky laugh. "I'm 22, she said. "You're definitely not too slow." I smiled, wiped my face with a tissue. My voice steadied. "Fear doesn't care how old we are," I said. "It finds all of us." Another pause, then, "Thanks." The toilet flushed. I heard her leave. And I just sat there, notebook in my lap, torn pages crumpled beside me like wounded soldiers. But something had shifted. That connection, brief, fragile, had pulled me back from the edge. I hadn't expected to be the one offering comfort, but maybe that's what I had forgotten all along. I had value. Even broken, I still had value. I smoothed the remaining pages of my notebook and stood up. In the mirror, my eyes were swollen, my lipstick faded, but there was something else in my reflection. Resolve, quiet, but there. I walked out of the bathroom and into the hallway. A few students passed by, laughing. They didn't see me, but I saw me. I saw the woman who had torn her notebook and then picked it up again. And I realized something. Tearing a page doesn't end the story. You just write the next one. Perfect. Let's keep the emotional thread alive with, the day after I almost quit, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual envelope, cream-colored, with my name written in cursive I recognized instantly, even after all these years. Lords R. Martins. The handwriting hadn't changed, still steady, slanted, patient. It was from Anna Beatrice. We hadn't spoken in over 30 years. She had been my childhood friend, my neighbor, my soul sister. We did everything together growing up, shared books, braided each other's hair, even fell asleep on the same cot during summer blackouts. But life pulled us apart. I got married. She moved abroad to study. I raised children. She built a career. We exchanged Christmas cards for a while, then silence settled in. And yet, here was her letter, written by hand, as if no time had passed. Dear Lourdina, it began, using the nickname only she ever called me. I heard from Clara, you remember her, don't you, that you've gone back to school, college, philosophy of all things. When she told me, I smiled so hard it made my cheeks ache. You don't know how long I've been waiting for this version of you to return. I read those words in the courtyard behind the library, alone, shaded by an old sycamore tree. I remember when you used to talk about Plato and God, and the way people treated each other, even when you were 17 and working 12-hour shifts at the sewing shop. I remember how your eyes lit up when you explained something you had read in the borrowed pages of that worn-down philosophy book we used to pass between classes. I stopped reading and closed my eyes. I remembered. That book, how we took turns copying paragraphs into our notebooks because we couldn't afford to keep it. How we'd dream out loud about teaching, about speaking in rooms full of people, about being heard. Anna's letter continued. I always believed you were the wisest person I knew, even when you didn't believe it yourself. And when I heard you had gone back, not for a job, not for anyone else, but for your own soul, I knew I had to write. A tear slid down my cheek. I folded the letter carefully and held it to my chest. That single page, those few words, felt like someone had reached across time and gently reminded me who I used to be, and who I still was, underneath the scars. That evening, I searched through an old drawer in the sewing room, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were fabric scraps, rusty needles, an old rosary, and at the very bottom, a photo. Anna and I, 15 years old, standing barefoot in a river, arms around each other's shoulders, laughing. I hadn't smiled like that in decades. I placed the photo on my desk beside her letter and lit a small candle. Not for prayer, but for memory, for presence, for light. The next day at school, something shifted. I still sat alone. The students still barely noticed me, but I carried Anna's voice with me, like a shield. I walked into the lecture hall a little taller. When the professor asked a question about Nietzsche's idea of suffering, I raised my hand again. He nodded toward me, and I spoke, clear, steady, not profound, not poetic, but mine. My voice filled the space. No one laughed. A few students turned to look. One girl even nodded. And for the first time since the semester began, I didn't feel like I was impersonating a student. I was a student. I was learning. I was becoming. That afternoon, I sat once more beneath the sycamore tree and began drafting a letter back to Anna. Dear Anna, I wrote, you have no idea what your letter did for me. Yesterday, I nearly gave up. I tore my notebook, doubted everything, questioned what I was even doing here. But then your voice came, so soft, so full of truth. And I remembered that I once dreamed for me, just me, not for my children or my husband or out of necessity. But because I loved the way ideas moved inside me, I smiled as I wrote, I still love it. I forgot for a while, but it's coming back. Slowly, like warmth after a long winter. Thank you, my friend, for reminding me of who I am. I didn't just send that letter, I sealed it with a kiss, and in doing so, I sealed something else, my decision to stay, no matter how hard it got, no matter who doubted me, because there was at least one voice, one heart that had always believed. And now, finally, so did I. Wonderful. Let's keep the momentum and emotion flowing with. The envelope was thin, unremarkable, just a single sheet of paper inside. It had been slid under my dorm-style mailbox at the continuing education office. Most students received their results by email, but I had requested paper copies. I still didn't trust online portals. I liked the weight of real things. I stood there for a moment, envelope in hand, afraid to open it. My heart pounded in that small, humiliating way it used to when I was a girl waiting for test scores I knew wouldn't be good enough. Except now, it was different. This time, I had tried. I had really tried, with every fiber of who I was. The late-night readings, the confused scrawls in the margins of my notebook, the dozens of pages read and reread, with tea in one hand and a highlighter in the other. I had given it everything I had left, and I was terrified it wouldn't be enough. I opened it slowly, smoothing the paper flat. Philosophy 101, Midterm Essay Assessment, 8.510. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I reread the grade again and again. 8.5. The professor had scribbled a few words beneath it. In a blue pen, I recognized thoughtful analysis, deep connection to lived experience, honest, mature insight. Very well done. I sat down on the bench outside the office. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wasn't just not failing, I was doing well. I looked around. The campus buzzed as usual, students darting past, earbuds in, sunlight catching in their messy hair. Life moved fast here, and I often felt like I was chasing a train that had already left the station. But right now, in this moment, I was on it. I was moving forward. The change was small at first. In the next class, the girl who sat beside me, Julia, I'd learned, turned and smiled. "Nice work on your paper," she said quietly. I blinked. She noticed my surprise and added, "Professor read a bit of it out loud in the seminar section. The part where you talked about your husband's silence after he got sick. That was really, I don't know. It hit." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. "Thank you." She nodded, then turned back to her notes. But something had shifted, not just in her, in me. I no longer felt like a shadow in that classroom. I had contributed something, and it had landed. Later that week, during a group activity, I was paired with two boys, Daniel and Khalil. They were talkative, smart, and always cracking jokes during lectures. Part of me braced for dismissal. But when we started discussing our assigned reading, Daniel leaned over and said, "Honestly, I'm glad we got paired. You actually know how to explain stuff." Khalil added, "Yeah, like that part about moral responsibility. The way you broke it down made it make sense." I wanted to cry. I didn't. But I felt something open up in my chest. Respect. Not pity. Not indulgence. Respect. That night, I walked home differently. My steps were slower, but not from pain. From peace. There was still a long way to go. I still felt tired more often than not. Still struggled with the fast pace of lectures, the technology, the loneliness. But now, there was something else, too. A crack of light. A glimpse of dignity restored. Not from recognition by others, but from recognizing myself again. I had spent so many years pouring into other people's lives that I forgot what it felt like to be filled myself. Now I remembered, and I wanted more. Back at home, I placed that 8.510 paper inside a folder marked First Semester. I added a little note to it in pencil. "You can do this." Then I opened my notebook and began working on the next assignment. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because for the first time in decades, I wasn't just surviving. I was growing, becoming. Becoming someone I had almost forgotten I could be. It happened by accident. A Tuesday afternoon, just before sunset, in one of the side rooms of the campus library. I had reserved the small study space weeks ago, hoping for a quiet place to review for our upcoming exam. I brought my notes, my worn copy of the Nicomachean Ethics, and a thermos of chamomile tea. I liked the quiet there, the way the light filtered through the dusty windows, the smell of books that had been touched by thousands of hands before mine. But I wasn't alone for long. About 15 minutes in, the door creaked open. It was Julia, the same girl who'd complimented my essay the week before. She looked hesitant, almost embarrassed. "Hey, sorry," she said. "I saw your name on the sign-up sheet. I was wondering if maybe you'd let me sit in with you. I'm seriously behind." I blinked. "Of course, come in." She smiled, dropped her heavy bag onto the table, and pulled out her textbook with a groan. "Honestly," she said, flopping into the chair, "Aristotle makes me want to cry." I smiled. "That's normal." She raised an eyebrow. "It is?" I nodded. "Yes, crying is part of philosophy. You just don't always do it in public." We started slow. I didn't lecture, I asked questions. "What do you think he means when he says virtue is a habit?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I guess maybe it's like brushing your teeth." I laughed. "That's actually not far off." She blinked. "Wait, really?" I nodded. "He believed we become who we are by what we do repeatedly, like training a muscle or brushing your teeth. A virtue becomes part of you when you choose it often enough." She leaned back in her chair, thinking, "That makes sense." And just like that, her shoulders dropped, her eyes softened, the fear faded. She wasn't stupid, she just needed space to breathe. For the next hour, we worked through passages together. I broke things down the way I used to explain sewing patterns to apprentices, step by step, with patience and analogies. And I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I still knew how to teach, not just explain, not just recite, teach, to listen, to guide, to sense confusion before it turned into shame. I had done it my whole life, teaching my children, my husband, my friends, even strangers. Teaching wasn't something I learned, it was something I carried. It had never left me. It had only been waiting. When we finished, Julia looked at me and said, "You should lead a study group, seriously. I think everyone would come." I laughed. "I don't think I'm exactly who they'd expect as a tutor." She grinned. "That's kind of why they'd come." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. The next morning, I found a note in my locker, handwritten on a sticky note. "Thanks for yesterday. I didn't feel dumb for the first time all semester. J." I folded it carefully and tucked it inside my notebook. A small thing, but it meant the world. That Friday, I stayed after class to ask the professor a question about our next assignment. He looked up from his papers and said, "Lords, I've been meaning to ask, have you ever taught before?" I froze. "Not officially." He nodded. "Well, you have a presence. When you speak, people actually listen. That's rare." I blinked, unsure how to respond. He added, "If you ever want to be a teaching assistant for the seminar group next semester, come see me." I stood there, heart thudding in my chest, and thought, me? An assistant? At 70? And then I thought, why not? I walked home that evening with a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt since my children were young, back when they used to come to me with their little hands open, waiting to be shown how to hold a pencil, tie a shoe, sound out a word. I had thought those days were over. I thought I was done being useful. But maybe I wasn't. Maybe the world didn't need me to keep up. Maybe it needed me to be exactly as I am, experienced, slow, deliberate, and full of stories. I hadn't lost my worth. It had only been quiet, waiting for me to remember. It was nearly midnight when the call came. I had just finished brushing my teeth, the last notes of soft piano music playing through the radio. The house was still, peaceful. I had finally grown to like that kind of silence, not the emptiness of being forgotten, but the calm of being enough for myself. Then the phone rang. It startled me, as calls after dark always do. The name on the screen made my heart jump. Rodrigo, my middle child, the one who'd laughed the hardest when I told them I was going back to college, the one who said I'd embarrass myself. We hadn't spoken in weeks. "Hi, son," I answered, trying to sound steady. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the TV in the background, then a door closing, muffling everything. "Hi, Mom," he said finally. His voice was different, softer, tired. "Are you all right?" I asked. Another pause. Not really. He sounded small, like the boy who once scraped his knees and ran to me in tears, not the man with graying hair and 2 kids of his own. What happened? I asked gently. I messed up at work, he said. Big. They let me go today. I sat down slowly at the edge of my bed. I'm sorry. He cleared his throat, but it cracked anyway. I don't know what to do, he said. I've got bills, Julia's school fees, the mortgage, and I thought I had time, you know? I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Time always feels endless until it isn't, he sniffed. I don't mean to dump all this on you. I just didn't know who else to call. His voice broke again, and I wanted to talk to someone smart. Those last words caught me off guard. Someone smart. That wasn't how he used to see me. We spoke for over an hour. I didn't lecture him. I didn't say I told you so. I simply listened. And when he finally quieted, I asked the question that had been sitting quietly on my chest. Rodrigo, do you remember when you told me I was too old to learn anything new? He groaned softly. Mom, I'm not angry, I said gently. I just want you to know that tonight, you came to me not as your mother, but as a person you trust to understand hard things. He was silent for a moment. Yeah, he said finally. I guess I did. And that means something. Another pause. I'm proud of you, Mom, he said, voice cracking again. I don't think I ever said that. Tears filled my eyes. You just did, I whispered. 2 days later, he showed up at my house. He looked older than I remembered, not just tired, softened. He brought a notebook, sat at the table like he used to when he was a boy doing his homework beside the stove while I prepared dinner. I need help rewriting my resume, he said. I haven't done this in 15 years. I smiled and opened my laptop. We sat for hours. I helped him shape his experience into something new, asked questions, reframed failures as lessons, encouraged him where he doubted himself. He looked at me as I typed, carefully, slowly, and said, You're really good at this. I've been studying, I said, glancing at him. He gave a sheepish smile. Yeah, I know. That night after he left, I sat by the window and watched the wind move the curtains. There had been a time, too long, too recent, when I felt like my children saw me as a relic, a sweet old woman who cooked well and meant no harm, but who had long outlived her usefulness. But tonight, I had been their anchor, their guide. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had walked through storms and kept walking. Later that week, Mariana called. She had heard from Rodrigo. I don't know what you told him, she said, but he sounded better, lighter. He just needed someone to listen, I said. There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, Mariana asked, Could you help me too? With a presentation I'm doing next week? I'm terrible at public speaking. I nearly laughed. Of course, I said, my daughter, asking me for help. People think pride comes from big things, awards, applause, recognition, but sometimes it comes quietly. From sitting across the table from your grown child and realizing they finally see you not just as mom, but as a woman who still has something to give. I had fought so hard to earn that respect, but in the end, I didn't earn it by shouting. I earned it by growing, quietly, steadily, into someone who no longer needed permission to matter. He was only 10, big eyes, long lashes, the kind of quiet boy who noticed everything but said very little. Lucas Jr., my grandson. We were sitting together at the kitchen table one evening, just the two of us. His parents had asked me to watch him while they went to a dinner party. He was always comfortable with me. We shared that gentle silence that some people mistake for awkwardness. That night, I was grading myself on a mock quiz I had printed from the university website. It was a habit I'd started, using practice tests to build confidence. I didn't want to just pass, I wanted to understand. He sat beside me, drawing dinosaurs with colored pencils, when he suddenly leaned over and peered at my papers. What are you doing, Grandma? Studying, I said. I've got a test next week. He blinked at me. Like school studying? I nodded. He tilted his head. But you're a grandma. I laughed softly. Yes, and grandmas can study too. He was quiet for a moment, his pencil hovering over the paper. Why? He asked, the way children ask when they actually want to understand. I looked at him, unsure how much he could grasp, but I answered honestly. Because when I was your age, I had to stop learning. I had to help my family. I've waited a long time for this. He nodded, seriously, as if that made perfect sense. Then he pointed to a term on my paper. Moral relativism. What's that mean? I smiled. It means that sometimes what people think is right or wrong depends on where they live or how they were raised. Not everyone sees things the same way. He tapped his pencil against the table. Like how some kids think talking back is normal, but I'd get in big trouble? I laughed. Exactly like that. He smiled. Then, just like that, he said it. So, you're like a professor now? I froze. Not because it was silly, but because something in the way he said it, so casually, so sincerely, made my heart swell. Not quite, I said gently, but I'm learning. He shrugged. You're still a professor to me. Later, after he went to sleep, I sat on the couch with my tea, staring at the soft glow of the lamp across the room. His words echoed inside me. You're still a professor to me. It wasn't a title. It was a recognition. A child who saw me not as background, not as decoration, but as someone becoming something, even at 70, especially at 70. In that moment, I realized something no grade or diploma could ever prove. I had changed the way he saw aging. For him, learning no longer belonged to the young. Dreams no longer expired after 50, and maybe, just maybe, because of me, he'd never be afraid to begin again, at any age. A week later, I visited his school for Grandparents' Day. I wore my soft blue scarf, the one Anna Beatrice once gifted me before she left for Portugal. The children were drawing their grandparent heroes. Lucas drew me with glasses, a notebook, and a big smile. Above my head, he wrote, "My grandma the professor." I almost cried right there, in front of all the other grandmas and grandpas and teachers sipping juice boxes. His teacher leaned over and whispered, "He talks about you all the time. You're a big inspiration to him." I had no words. I just placed my hand gently over his small one and squeezed. That night, when I returned home, I opened my desk drawer and took out a blank page. At the top, I wrote, "Reasons to keep going," and I listed just one. 1. Lucas Jr. thinks I'm a professor. That was enough. More than enough. Legacy isn't money, it isn't property or heirlooms. It's the quiet permission we give to the next generation to dream differently, to see strength in vulnerability, to understand that becoming never ends. I may never hold the title professor, but my grandson called me one, and that means more than any degree ever could. When they first announced the student panel, I didn't even consider signing up. An open mic night for philosophy students, the flyer read. Share an idea, a memory, a question. 5 minutes, no grades, just voices. Voices. That word stopped me, because for so long, I didn't have one. I had a role. I had responsibilities. I had opinions that were whispered in kitchens, held in clenched hands, swallowed with tea. But not a voice, not one that anyone invited into a room and asked to stay. Still, I folded up the flyer and tucked it in my notebook. I didn't tell anyone, I just thought about it. The night of the event, I almost didn't go. I stood in front of the mirror, cardigan buttoned, hair brushed back into its usual bun. I looked like myself, but not quite. I could hear my doubts louder than my heartbeat. You'll be the oldest person there. You'll forget what to say. You'll sound ridiculous. Then I glanced at the desk, at the drawing Lucas Jr. had made. My grandma, the professor. And beneath it, in his messy handwriting, She teaches people how to think. I picked up the drawing, folded it gently, and slipped it into my handbag. Then I walked out the door. The auditorium wasn't large, but it felt enormous. Rows of seats filled quickly. Students with notebooks, iced coffee, laughter. A few professors leaned against the walls. The stage was nothing more than a microphone and a spotlight. My name was fifth on the list. The girl before me spoke about how grief had changed her definition of justice. Her voice shook, but she spoke, and I sat there in the second row, notebook in hand, palms sweating, the weight of 70 years on my shoulders. And for the first time, I didn't feel heavy. I felt ready. When they called my name, Lords Martins, first-year student, there was a polite pause, then a few curious glances. I rose slowly. Each step toward the stage felt like I was walking into the past, the present, and the future all at once. I stepped into the light, took the microphone, looked out at a sea of young faces, some familiar, some indifferent, and I began. My name is Lords. I'm 70 years old, and this is the first time in my life that anyone has ever handed me a microphone. A ripple of laughter, soft, not mocking, kind. I was taught to be quiet, I continued, make space for others, to serve, to listen, and I did. For most of my life, I was a mother, a wife, a worker, but never a student. I paused. My husband died. My children grew. And suddenly the silence I had lived with wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. More silence. Some students leaned forward. And then one day I saw a flyer, a small thing, a reminder that not all doors were closed, that maybe, even at 70, I could still choose something new. I glanced at the paper in my hand, not my speech, but Lucas Jr.'s drawing. I held it up. This is from my grandson. He thinks I'm a professor. The room smiled. He doesn't care about my grades. He sees that I try, that I show up, that I ask questions. I looked directly into the crowd now. And that's what I wanted to say tonight. Showing up matters. Trying matters. Even if your hands tremble, even if your voice shakes, you belong in any room you walk into, the moment you decide you do. The applause started slowly, then spread like warmth across the room. When I stepped down, people stood. Some clapped. Some wiped their eyes. One professor whispered as I passed, "Thank you for reminding us why we teach." After the event, a dozen students approached me. Some just hugged me. Others told me about their grandmothers, about their doubts, about how they'd been afraid to speak too. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not because of the spotlight, but because I had dared to stand in it. And when I got home that night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, opened a fresh page in my notebook, and wrote just 2 words. I spoke. I didn't know they did things like that anymore. Not for people like me, at least. I had only gone to the administration building to drop off a signed form for an upcoming workshop. The hallway was quiet. End-of-semester fatigue hung in the air like dust. Students rushing past with tired eyes and overstuffed backpacks. I moved slowly, deliberately, the way I always do now. I've learned not to rush anymore. Life will wait if you walk like you deserve to be there. As I passed the Student Achievement Board, a glass-covered frame just outside the dean's office, something caught my eye. A printed list, typed in clean black letters, top essay submissions, Faculty of Humanities. And there, between a Sophia and a Malik, was my name. Lords Martins, first-year student, philosophy. I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't imagining it. It was there, on the wall, in public, for others to see. No one around me stopped, no one pointed, but I did. I placed my hand against the glass, lightly, and for a moment, the building, the hallway, the world, all fell away. I wasn't 70, I was 7. I was the girl who had begged her mother for more time with a school book before chores. The girl who traced letters in the steam on the kitchen window, pretending they meant something. I was 16. I was the young bride who put away her favorite poetry book because her husband said, "No man wants a woman who talks too much." I was 35. I was the mother who helped her son rehearse his science fair speech while folding laundry with hands that ached from a 12-hour shift. And now, here I was, on the wall, not as someone's mother, not as someone's wife, not as a name on a hospital file or utility bill, but as Lord Martin's student, thinker, voice. When I returned home that evening, I didn't say anything. I didn't call my children. I didn't post it online. I simply took a pen, pulled out my journal, and wrote, "Today I saw my name where it had never been allowed before, and I didn't ask for it. I earned it." Then I made tea, chamomile. Quiet victory has its own flavor. A few days later, Julia found me outside the campus cafe. She was holding a copy of the campus newsletter, eyes wide. "Did you see this?" she asked, waving the paper. I nodded. "I saw it on the wall." She smiled. "You're kind of famous now, you know." I laughed. "Hardly." "No," she insisted. "You're what I think about when I want to quit. Seriously." She looked at me a moment, then added something soft, almost embarrassed. "You give the rest of us hope." Hope. At 70 years old. Me. The woman who once sat alone, terrified, too afraid to raise her hand. That weekend, my daughter Mariana stopped by with groceries and the girls. We were standing in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon bread in the oven, when she glanced at a piece of paper pinned to my fridge. It was the list, the same one from the campus wall. I had printed it out, just for me. She stared at it for a moment. "You didn't tell me," she said quietly. "I didn't think I had to," I replied. She turned to me then, and for the first time in what felt like years, her eyes softened. Not with guilt, not with pity, with respect. "Congratulations, Mom," she said. And it wasn't casual, it wasn't perfunctory, it was real. And I felt it, all the way down to the little girl who once dreamed of seeing her name on a report card that wasn't stamped incomplete. Recognition doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need applause or flowers or parties. Sometimes it's just a name on a wall. Sometimes it's the quiet way your daughter finally says congratulations, like it's a truth she's been carrying in her chest and didn't know how to give you. And sometimes it's the way you look in the mirror after all those years of silence and say, "There you are." I've been called Mom for so long, I almost forgot I had another name. A beautiful name. Lord's. Not Ma, not My, not Vo, not "Can you pick up the kids?" or "Did you remember the groceries?" Just Lord's. A name chosen for me before I ever spoke a word. But somewhere along the line, it got buried beneath the roles, the expectations, the sacrifices. It wasn't stolen. I gave it away, bit by bit, with every diaper I changed, every dinner I cooked, every late night waiting for someone to come home safe. That kind of giving, it becomes you, until one day you wake up and the woman inside you feels like a stranger. That's what I realized the morning I stood in front of the mirror and saw myself, not as Mom, but as a student preparing for her final oral exam. Hair freshly done, eyes focused, notes highlighted with colors that actually meant something. I said it out loud. "Good morning, Lords." And I smiled. She smiled back. It's not that I ever resented motherhood. I cherished it. Still do. There's nothing more sacred than raising a soul. But being a mother doesn't mean the rest of you stops existing. And I had spent decades living like it did. If someone had asked me 5 years ago, "What do you want, Lords?" I would have said, "Whatever my children need." That was the truth. And that was the tragedy. Because beneath that answer, there had once been a woman who wanted to study, to write, to ask hard questions, to understand the world and her place in it. I thought she was gone, but she was just waiting. Waiting for permission I didn't know I could give myself. On the day of my oral exam, the professor looked at me across the table and said, "You're remarkably clear in your reasoning. You speak with a certain earned stillness." I laughed softly. That's what 70 years of silence will do. He smiled, but I meant it. I had learned to listen deeply, to speak slowly, to choose my words with care, not because I was afraid of being wrong, but because I had spent too long being unheard. Now, when I speak, I mean it. And when people listen, I don't shrink. I stand a little taller inside. Later that week, my children came for dinner, all three of them. No one asked about groceries. No one rolled their eyes when I mentioned school. Instead, Mariana brought a bottle of wine and said, "To Mom, the philosopher." Rodrigo added, "You're the most disciplined person I know." Lucas, the quietest of the three, looked at me with something that made my breath catch, a kind of reverence. "Do you think," he asked, "you'll ever teach full-time?" I stared at him, not because the idea shocked me, but because for the first time, it didn't. I could, I might, not for prestige, not for income, but because the idea of standing in front of a room and lighting little flames in other people's minds, it felt like home. After dinner, while the others cleaned up, I slipped outside with my tea. The night air was cool, crisp. The stars were out, dim behind the city lights, but still there, always there. I thought about the woman I'd become, not instead of Mom, but in addition to her. A woman who still remembered how to nurture, but also how to choose, how to give without disappearing, how to speak without apology, how to take up space in the world without waiting for permission. I sipped my tea and whispered to the night, "I'm still here, and I'm not done yet." When I walked back inside, I heard Lucas Jr. showing his cousins my name on the university website. "That's her," he said proudly. "She's in the top 10. His little sister asked, "Is she famous?" He shook his head. "No, she's more important than that." I don't need statues or articles or stages. I just needed this, to live as more than one thing, to be mother, teacher, dreamer, student, and woman, all at once. And to know that I never had to choose just one. It was raining that morning. Not a heavy storm, just a soft, quiet drizzle. The kind of rain that feels like the sky is remembering something. I stood by the mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the gown they had given me. It felt heavier than I expected, but comforting somehow. Like a blanket I had spent a lifetime stitching together, each thread woven from choices no one had seen, each fiber holding moments I thought the world had forgotten. I pinned the tassel to the cap with trembling fingers. Then I looked at myself and whispered, "You made it." The ceremony was held in the university auditorium. Rows of seats filled with proud parents, young graduates, children with homemade signs, and tired grandparents clapping politely. I saw them all as I entered, but I didn't search for anyone. I just walked slowly, steadily toward my seat, the only gray-haired figure in a sea of restless youth. Some students smiled at me as I passed. Others gave me nods of respect, but no one laughed, not anymore. When my name was called, Lords Martins, Bachelor of Philosophy, the room quieted in a different way, not a pause of confusion, but of reverence. I stood, walked across the stage, and accepted my diploma. The dean smiled as he handed it to me. "You've taught us more than you know," he said. I simply nodded. My voice wouldn't have held. After the ceremony, I stepped outside, cap in hand, the air still damp with the scent of rain on stone. And there they were, my children, all three, standing in the courtyard, waiting. Mariana was the first to approach. Her eyes were already glistening. She reached out, adjusted the edge of my robe like I was a bride instead of a graduate, and whispered, "I was wrong, Mom." Rodrigo stepped forward next. He looked older than I remembered, but softer somehow. He put his hand on my shoulder. "I didn't get it back then. I didn't see you, but now I do." Then Lucas came last. He didn't speak at first. He just hugged me, tightly, like a son clinging to something sacred. When he pulled back, he said, "You gave us everything, and we never gave you permission to be more than that. I'm so sorry. I held his hand in both of mine. You didn't owe me permission, I said softly. I just forgot I could give it to myself. They cried, all three, and for once I didn't cry. I stood tall. Not as the mother who cooked their meals, not as the widow who paid the bills, not as the woman they had once rolled their eyes at for daring to dream too late, but as Lord Martin's graduate, philosopher, voice. Later, at the small reception the university hosted, I stood with my classmates, sipping lemonade, listening to them talk about what they wanted to do next. Master's degrees, internships, gap years, plans I once believed belonged only to the young. Then one of them, Julia, turned to me and asked, "What about you, Lords? What's next?" I smiled. Not because I had a detailed plan, but because for the first time in decades I didn't need one. "I'm going to keep learning," I said, "and I'm going to keep teaching, wherever someone's listening." They all nodded. No one looked surprised. They believed me now, because I believed me. That night I returned home, placed my diploma on the mantel, and made myself a cup of tea. Chamomile. Always chamomile. Then I sat down and opened my journal to the very last page, and I wrote, "I wasn't too old. I was just on time, and I was never too late to be seen." Then I closed the journal, and with it, a chapter of my life that had taken 70 years to begin, and only now was truly mine. They said I was too old, that it was embarrassing, impossible, that I'd never finish, that I wouldn't belong. But the truth is, sometimes you don't do it to prove them wrong. You do it to finally hear your own voice, and mine had waited long enough. Have you ever been told you were too old to start something new? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs your courage today.